Hey, how's it going? I'm Rigger, back again after a little hiatus, sorry about that everyone. But the world premiere, the early sneak peek of RWBY Ice Queendom episodes 1 to 3 just dropped, and I couldn't not talk about it, obviously. But before we get started, a few disclaimers. First of all, I'm not sharing any visuals from the show. This is just going to be pretty much audio. I might use some visuals from RWBY itself, the main series, to illustrate, maybe. We'll see. But in general, I'm not touching it for a few reasons. First of all, it's annoying as hell to capture at the moment anyway. Second of all, it's the sneak peek. I don't really feel comfortable sharing too much of it. And in all honesty, I just don't want to get struck into the ground for even trying to share this. I actually want to share it and talk about it. So, you're gonna have to see it for yourself. You can do that on Crunchyroll, you can do that on RT First. That is just how it goes. But I'm here to talk about my thoughts on it, and I want to hear your thoughts on it in the comments, so let's dive into this thing. RWBY Ice Queendom. How did we go? How did we start? Well, just like me, as you can see on screen, they've had a little makeover. The animation is pretty excellent. They are putting their best foot forward, they're showing off some great animation, and it's worth your time to see it. Very quickly, before I start talking any details, if you don't want any spoilers, I'm just going to say it up front. Yes, this is worth watching. No, this isn't throwaway. I would definitely get in and watch this thing. If you want to wait till it comes out world premiere, of course, then do that. But yeah, it's definitely worth seeing. So, my review is thumbs up, go watch it. Now, we'll do spoilers from here on out, so you've been warned. Normally in my thoughts videos I go through the things beat by beat, but it's an hour long. If I did that, this video would be many hours long, and I more just want to talk in summary, and then we'll go into a few little details at the end. In summary, what I think needs to be praised about this is the adaptation and consolidation. There's so many things in this that we always wanted to see, little details that weren't possible, things that, if RWBY was redone from the ground up, if Rooster Teeth would just do it over again, if they had that opportunity, they're things you imagine they just would do, things that weren't possible at the time, things they didn't have, things in place for at the time, things they didn't have assets for, things they didn't have time and money for. And those things can now be done, just little things. And when I say that, I don't just mean like the shadow people in the backgrounds. I mean things like we see little flashes of things RWBY likes, things in her day, her visiting weapons stores, that kind of stuff. Little things that really help build the world. Also, we avoid RWBY's curse in a way. RWBY's curse that has hooked people in, but is an issue which is sometimes it feels like any drop of information, any little morsel of things that don't even seem to matter are held at bay for very long periods of time. Like, we don't see what Tai looks like till the end of Volume 3, except for that one little tease, and why was there a tease? Little things like that. They don't have to be here. We see Tai early on. We see everything early on. RWBY mentions Patch, like, immediately, so we understand where she lives and how things work. It all just kind of clicks a little nicer. And in that way, it does a really good job of catching people up if you don't know RWBY. It's honestly a bit simpler, and that's a good thing. That is one of the huge criticisms that RWBY will never escape as a show, that, at least the main series, is inaccessible. You need to read things up online, you need to be aware of the fandom, you need to have these concepts that were talked about in commentaries or, in outside information. You need to watch all the trailers and the betweens and all those kind of things, or you don't get it. And even then, there's still arguments. This does a really good, concise job of catching you all up to at least where we need to be for this story to start. And I think it's pretty interesting. I do think that we're skimming some of the details away of the deeper world, but I think that's for our benefit. If you were around this channel when we were discussing ideas for Ice Queendom, what it might be, I said even then, I think we're gonna get away from the maidens, we're gonna get away from Ozpin, and probably get away from Salem, and honestly, it seems like we're doing that, and that's a good thing. Because the whole point of this is to explore something new, a new story, and it's really hard to do a new story when you have the same old things over your head. The mystery of who Ozpin is and all these things can be put aside because we're doing something else. Which, as far as I'm concerned, is a perfect way to address this. As for what happens in, Volume 3 and all that, who knows? Maybe we'll get to it, maybe we never will. There's a good chance all this is over and, we rejoin the story in Volume 3 or in Volume 2, and it just continues from there as if this side story didn't happen. It was just a flight of fancy. That's fine. Don't worry too much about canon. Let's get into this thing. Immediately, we start seeing the influences of this consolidation, such as we ditch the Red trailer and we ditch Yang's trailer. That also means that we ditch, like the Raven subplot, all that's gone for now. We don't need it. And, you know, it's a shame because you would love to see especially the red trailer in this animation, but instead we bounce around through all the RWBY girls and get a little intro. Things that were hidden that didn't need to be hidden that we know now, such as seeing Weiss in Atlas, seeing a bit of her home life, seeing Whitley and a bit of Willow, and seeing Jacques and Winter being there, and getting hints about their relationship, which is still in place. When Winter shows up, you think she wouldn't be here. No, she would. She's trying to help Weiss sort of escape. And that leads into the White trailer, where you get a bit more of an explanation of what's going on. Not in detail, but more than you got in the show of what that means, what she's fighting and why. It's actually in the show now. It's not just things you had to go look up. And the same goes for Blake, which makes sense because we need to get the Black trailer because we need the Adam stuff and the Faunus stuff because it's going to play into at least the start. The animation on both those fights is of course different. You can see when they're trying to mirror shots exactly, and it's never going to look the same, but it also shouldn't. It should have its own thing. I have basically no criticisms of it except for the sound effects. I'm not a big fan of the way the sound effects are for, say, Waifu's glyphs and that kind of things, but I think that's just because the old ones are so inbuilt in me that hearing something different is a bit odd. And they sound a bit more sort of mechanical and that kind of thing, which I guess makes sense for the weapons, but not so much the glyphs, but that's okay. What's interesting is the one character we really don't get an introduction to much is Yang, at least in a combat sense. We see Weiss fight the Knight, we see Blake fight on the train, we see RWBY fight Roman. We don't really have a fight for Yang. But she does get a fight in the forest, kind of, but not really. She's actually the least viewed in combat, which I hope is rectified. Her combat is so unique from the others that I do hope we get to see it in full, which I'm sure we will over time, so it's not some deal-breaking thing or anything. But actually, sue me, I kind of like the introduction we get a little better to Yang, because instead of the combat and the stuff in the club and all that, you instead see her meet RWBY by Summer's grave. It's kinda great. Because at least for now, it seems like we're not getting into Volume 2, which means we're not getting the big talks between Blake and Yang, at least yet. So, despite not getting the details, we need to form some of the attachment between Yang and Summer, which some people have struggled to see even now. So, just those little touches really help. It's kinda like with everything I've mentioned already, that the little touches really help, the little fleshing out of the world, and that includes the characters and the writing. Little comments from Whitley, and comments by Winter, and comments by Adam. Seeing the White Fang roll up on the train as it comes to a stop, the train cars that were separated, that all adds to things. In fact, one of my favourite scenes is a nothing scene in this, and it's literally just a moment with Blake after she's escaped the train, where she's swinging her way through the middle of nowhere. She ends up in a little barn, just hiding out for a second, we see a Grim and a few other things, and she gets her acceptance into Beacon. How that works, we don't know. Doesn't matter. Point is, you just get a little moment alone with her. That's really big. That does more to build Blake than we had in Volume 1. At least until that point. Because later we do get some more of those building blocks. You get her discussion with Sun, and even that is clarified. It's simplified down a little better and makes a little more sense the first time through. Obviously, we come at it with perspective of people who know the show anyway, but I think it does a really good job if you take yourself out of that mindset and think, I'm seeing this for the first time, does this explain things? And it kinda does. At least in a very concise way that gets across what you need to know. Real quick, while we're doing introductions, I think I'll talk about the acting. It's excellent, although seeing Jacques with such a deep voice is off-putting because that little weasel doesn't deserve such a lovely voice. He deserves to sound at least as terrible as I do. Also, the designs, there's nothing special because so far we haven't seen anything too new except for the one new teacher, or I guess professor, who is interesting and has a very unique design and definitely stands out. And you can tell it doesn't super fit with the other designs, but they are their sort of own unique thing, introducing their own unique element to the story, so it's fair enough. Although if anyone wins in the updated design look just from the animation, it's Winter. Ooh, yeah, excellent. And Linda is a close second. But the aesthetic is pretty much the same. Crescent Rose, I think, has the most upgrades in terms of, flashiness. You get a lot more glints off the blade and shadowing and close-ups of the barrel shooting, things like that look really good in the animation style. So that's really cool to see. A lot of that dynamic lighting and stuff that's so much harder to do in regular RWBY in the way it's presented. But yeah, going back to that consolidation of events, it really works to just speed things up. It does what I think should be done. If I was writing it, it's what I'd do. And I think it's what a lot of people have suggested for rewrites and that kind of thing, is You don't need so many locations and things so spaced out to start. The character interaction with all the main girls is done on the airship to Beacon. They don't get there and meet there and hang around and go to the hall and sleep at night and then get stuff told to them in the prep room and then go out to the trial, etc, etc. No, you have all these characters in one place. They're all on the airship. Meet Nora and Ren. Meet Jean. Meet Pyrrha. Learn who Pyrrha is. Get the news reports. Learn a little bit about the White Fang. Try and meet Blake. That conflict happens. They say something that offends Weiss, and then their weapons are stored in lockers on the ship. They are retrieved, and then the ship delivers them to the trial straight away. That's excellent. It just speeds everything up in a way that really suits this show and really would suit the main show. You don't need all those extra beats. As far as character relations go, everything is as is. It's pretty much what you expect. The only thing that gets shuffled is the order of events. Like, Pyrrha doesn't unlock Jean's aura in the forest, she unlocks it later on the rooftop. He makes it through the trial without aura. So, little things like that don't really matter and kind of help, again, bring all these things together and smooth out the edges. But one thing I really like seeing is the sort of new angles on old scenes. So we see Pyrrha and Jean on the rooftop, and she's unlocking his aura and talking to him about aura and trying to teach him, and Weiss is spying on them. Because, yeah, why not? She really wants Pyrrha on side. She can't understand why Jean is here and how he made it through like this. Little things that will come up later probably, and touch on things we already know. And that's done by just introducing a new character into a scene we sort of already know, just a version of it. Really good. But again, leaning towards we might be cutting down on the maidens and that kind of plot and all those things, we see Cinder for a brief second. We get no demonstration of her crazy powers, we don't get anything like that. You just see her dress as she's flying the ship and they leave. That's all done very quickly. But we have new additives, like Tai and Yang being around in the city looking for Ruby when all that goes down and Glinda saves her. And we see things like Ozpin goes to the holding place where they have Ruby, and you see guards salute him. That tells you his status. But afterwards you also see him and Tai have a conversation. They mention Team Stark, which surely is going to get some people excited. I wouldn't get your hopes up, but it's just cool. And those little relationships are there that there's no reason to hide. And they just help build the world. People know more than just the people they're on screen with, because we can now show them on screen with those people. It's great. Before we start going into the new elements, I just want to touch on one more thing, is I actually really like the writing in this. Obviously, I'm seeing it in Japanese, and the performances are great, but the actual writing is really great too. I don't know if this is how it's always phrased in the Japanese adaptation, because I haven't watched it of the original, but things like Winter bringing up the line that the powerless return to dust. It's a great play off the opening. It's cool that that's in the world, that people have this kind of idea. And they mention it later, saying that Grimm immediately returned to dust. I like this flavoring. It's great. I wish it was that way from the start. Just tying these things together. Just these excellent little touches of in-world sayings and things that match up with things we know, and two things that are alike, so why wouldn't they call them similar? It's great. Because suddenly you have the human character saying that the powerless will return to dust. And then the weapon they use is dust, but obviously magical, and then the Grimm, when they die, they return to dust. You have this theming running through that's really interesting and really great. Also incorporating scenes we know. So during Weiss's test against the Knight, we also see flashes of her talks with Winter, and those come from the character shorts we saw much later in the series, but would have taken place around the same time. That's great, just tie these things together that we know, and sort of fit that jigsaw together more in line. It's excellent. But now we'll talk about the new elements. Shion Zaiden. So we have this mysterious magician-looking guy, turns up with a wish-catcher staff, and he says that his prey, the Nightmare Grimm, is around. And he does this right at the trials. So, we are already changing things pretty early on. It sort of sounded like initially they were going to do volumes 1 and 2 and then things were going to change. That's not the case at all. In fact, I actually want to address that real quick. I said this might be the case because it was worded strangely in the releases. They said episodes 1 and 2 would cover volumes 1 to 2, 1-2. And I said in my Penny video that you can go watch if you'd like, although it's, a little out of date now, that doesn't make sense in like a timescale. You'd have to really condense things. And then do things change moving into volume 3? That's an odd place to do it. and I suggested that maybe they mean it's just Volume 1. It's Volume 1 through to 2, as in where 2 starts, and that's exactly what it is, except it's 3 episodes, not 2. We get to the end of Volume 1 by the end of Episode 3. Time-wise, that works a lot better, but it isn't what a lot of people thought it was. It's a bit more slowed down, which is great, because even now it does feel a little bit rushed to get through the things we know, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that does mean that, yeah, early on at the trials we're already introducing this new element. This new professor is here, hunting his prey, this mysterious nightmare Grim, and it's around the trial area. That's not good. So, the girls, Team Juniper as well, they all go through, do their trials, they get the same totems. There are little updates to the animation that I like that make it different, such as with the Deathstalker. They don't put the stinger through its head and Nora hammers it down. Instead, they cut off the stinger which falls by the side, Hera fires her spear into the front of it, and Nora hammers the spear, skewering it all the way out through the back, in a pretty intense, confronting, probing fashion of a shot when we see it come out the other side, but point taken, and those little things are cool. It doesn't have a lot of the same impact in those famous sequences. It has its own things that give it flavor. But, say, the taking down of the giant Nevermore. That is one of the greatest animated sequences ever, whether you like how RWBY looks or whatever. That scene, the pacing, the beats, the music, it's crazy. Like, I feel myself sort of shake forward, and like I can feel the energy right as that head comes off. It just pops off perfectly in the original. And this one doesn't have that. It has an amazing bit of animation, it looks great, it doesn't match the original in that scene. I don't expect it to, and it didn't. That's not a huge criticism, but I'm just going to point out because we're going on that way. But the point is that Shion says that they discovered the hiding place of this thing, as in within the forest, and presumably the kids might have come across it without knowing. And at this point we don't know what it is. And we jump to the formation of the teams, which is pretty much the same, except we skip Cardinal, which I think people probably took a sigh of relief at. And then we see something that looks like a crack on the back of Weiss's neck, and nothing more is said about it. Which is good, a little, introduction. But what I really like is we have to start speedrunning the things we know. So we get through changing up the room really quick, we get through the class with Port really quick, but that's where we start seeing changes, where Weiss is seeing an alternate version of herself just standing off to the side. It's very anime, but hey, we're in an anime, so it definitely fits. And she's ignoring this, and we get through the speeches with Port and Ozpin, and we get through the makeup scene between RWBY and Weiss, where she brings her the coffee, all those things. And little issues are flattened out, like Weiss brings her the coffee from the start rather than disappearing and magically making it in 2 seconds. So little things like that, but those don't really matter. So the point is we have this new element somewhat introduced. And what we've seen more is that Jean is dealing with this too. He's seeing weird things and having doubts. And that's where we get to an element of this that I actually really like, but we'll save it for a second. Talking about Weiss, we'll just cover what happens to Jean. We get our introduction because Jean doesn't wake up and he's covered in these viney marks. And Shion steps in and says, okay, he's in a nightmare. The Nightmare Grim has him trapped in a dream where it will feed off his aura and create new Grim, supposedly, which makes you picture like an alien situation, which is kind of cool. You know what, don't care if that's how Grim have been established to work. That's how they're saying this one is, it's cool. So with that, he has an ability, I guess maybe it's his semblance, who knows, to send the others into John's dream, and this is how we get our big exposition dump, really, for what's going on. But that's fine, we got to get through it. And only people that the person accepts can enter their mind, people they're close to, otherwise the mind will reject them. You have to go in there and bring them out of the nightmare. If they do that successfully, which they do with Jean pretty easily, which is good, you get a little insight into his backstory since we had to skip that, where the armor from his past is manifesting as his ancestors talking to him and mocking him, or at least not as his ancestors, but talking about his ancestors, so that's really cool. And the team arrive, pull him out, but it's all very easy, or at least seen as very easy. And it's interesting, they actually have a line out. They can talk to Shion through like a mystical phone, which is kind of interesting. I kind of like that. That could be used really effectively later. But the point is, they rescue Jean, the thing shoots out of Jean, and they capture it, and you see it's a little seed. The imagery around it is these big vines. So it gets captured as a little seed, and Shion has a way to store it, and we get our exposition dump that the lesser your aura, sort of the better. It's why Jean had an easier time with this. It's that it didn't have a lot to hold on to, it didn't have a lot to feed off yet. But if it goes with someone with stronger aura, that's obviously all increased. And you also get the insight that your emotional state, as well as how conflicted you are, all make you more susceptible to the Nightmare Grim possessing you. And this tells us it's going to be really bad, because we know Weiss is powerful, they've been doing a good job of demonstrating that, and we know it's on her too, because we've seen the mark on her neck. And we've also seen this shadow Weiss sometimes lurking around. And that's where we get into the Faunus stuff, which I think is also handled really well. Like I said, Blake's conversation with Sun is handled great, and we have a quick introduction to Penny, which I think is great. She comes off really quirky, but they hide a lot more about her, which has its benefits and negatives. We all know what she is at this point, but in the show, they're not giving that away as much. Her quirkiness just comes off a lot more quirky. We only get a moment with her, but I think it's really good. I really like how Penny's presented. Then they have the argument, and again, consolidation. They just have the whole argument in the street. They don't go back to the room and run away. They have it out in the street where Blake lets slip what she is, and he runs away, and Sun goes and finds her. And we actually have a little explanation that Penny saw Blake with the bow off at one point, because she takes it off dramatically, and those kind of things. So we reshuffle a few of those locations, speed everything up, it's fine. But what this all culminates in is really important, because they're out looking for her, and of course, you know, Ruby's running off around. I thought they were going to make a big writing mistake here, because Ruby says she's going to run off to the warehouse for no reason. Like, oh, she's going to run across the battle. But she doesn't. She can't find them. So that's good. They didn't just conveniently have Ruby turn up in the right place. They still have them over here, the battle nearby, and head there. So that's good. But the point of this is that it's actually Yang and Weiss who are paired up, and as they were in the show, and they're talking. And, you know, Yang is giving her the rundown. Like, you don't really think this, you're just pretending, and all these kind of things. All the things that, you know, Weiss has talked about. That she doubts Ruby and she deserves better and all these kind of things. And we have this really interesting conflict where Weiss breaks down. She has a breakdown about how everything's not working out. She's on a team with a Faunus and she's having trouble accepting that as much as she's trying to. She really sort of can't. And you know, she's not the leader, it's Ruby for some reason. She didn't get on a team with Pyrrha, which is what she desperately wanted, and she starts listing off these things that are stacking up in her mind, which is really good because it really motivates what we all assume is about to happen. And putting those there and showing a bit more conflict, Weiss does the same thing that she does in the normal show where she just says, you know what, I'm over it. But the idea that she isn't really over it, it's lingering in her head. As much as she wants to be over it, she is lying to herself a little bit, which I think is probably true in the main story too. We just don't see it. She doesn't just on a dime accept Ruby. She says in the show, I've decided to try and become a better teammate. That doesn't mean she necessarily accepts Ruby immediately, but she's gonna do her best. She says to Yang here that perhaps she took it too far with what she said about Blake, and she's trying to confront that side of herself and try and see things from a different perspective. That doesn't mean she can do it immediately. And she's still torn up about Pyrrha. She wanted Pyrrha on her team. They mention that a little bit more than they do in the regular show. She mentions it a couple times. And it's great. These doubts are just stacking up right then and there. Then I think we get the biggest misstep of this whole thing. And I know why they did it, but we missed out on a lot, which is we basically skipped the entire ending fight to Volume 1. Episode 3 ends at the end of Volume 1. Exactly. And we missed the whole dogfight. And what we do is we dodge talking about Penny. We dodge her showing off all her skills. You just see her with all her swords walking out of fire, and, you know, Torchwick gets away. And that, you know, hides a little bit more of what Penny is. The only line we get is Torchwick saying, you know, what is that monster? And leaves. But we get the idea that more people would have seen what was there. Blake was there, Sun was there. They're not going to comment on it, apparently. And it feels like, likely because we're going to dodge the storyline, that we're not going into the whole Faunus thing. We mention it, no, the Faunus aren't supposed to work with humans. Jump down to stop Torchwick, this is Blake, cut away, and then by the time we get back, the whole thing is over. So we don't get their conversation about being under new management and working together and those kind of things. And again, we don't touch on Cinder anymore, which I don't think they're going to be in the story. I don't think Emerald and Mercury are even going to play in here. If we see them at all, maybe in the background, maybe in passing, but it really seems like they're not going to be a focus at all, which is good, but it's definitely a change of things, and it definitely says why the things of the docks were changed, but also you have to think, in this new animation that we've really enjoyed seeing, we didn't get to see things like the gun chucks. Now, maybe we can use that as a reveal later if Sun's going to hang around with events going on. He can use them later, that would be cool, but, you know, the chance to see those things in this animation, that seems, you know, a bit of a loss. And also, Penny's giant beam attacks. You know, maybe they wanted to scale her down a little bit. Doesn't really seem like it with the destruction she caused. We didn't get to see that in this animation either, so hopefully those things come into play. But as I talked about a while ago in the Penny video I made, it seems like she's going to be important, and they're hiding the details about her because we're probably going to get into Atlas-y stuff, and because of that, they either don't want to talk about her, or they're saving her as a reveal. There's a decent chance that we go into Weiss's nightmare here, and that's the whole rest of the show. And we don't cover Penny, we don't talk about any of that, unless Weiss knows something already and she hasn't let on in this variation of time. But there's a decent chance we're just leaving it all behind, and we're just going to go into Weiss's dream now, and that's it. Because things end where Weiss is confronted by her shadow self, who brings all this up. That, you know, these things didn't go your way, and you're lying to yourself, and you have all these doubts, and this is a problem, and they do the face-to-face scary, and the vines come up, and I get the idea that Weiss has probably gone into the nightmare, and they're gonna have to send in Team RWBY to get her out. If that lasts an episode, doubtful. If that lasts the rest of the season, maybe. My actual prediction is that it will last probably most of the rest of the season, but you'll cut outside now and then because we have talks over the phone with Shion, ways to get out of the nightmare, or at least take the focus outside. And outside we have Team Juniper to run around and do things. All these things could happen, so I think that's the direction we're heading, and I'm hoping that the things we had to skip were necessary and will be made up for later. But I think we're really, again, there's a reason they cut off here. We're really starting the story here. And I suppose this is going to be the culmination of the story if Weiss got everything she wanted, and, you know, things turn out that way. The only other criticisms I'll say is that we had to skip through some other things that were bonding, right? So we got a little bit of Pyrrha and Jean, we didn't get anything with Nora and Ren, but we had to talk about how close they all are because they could enter Jean's dreams, how much they care for each other. It's evident in what they did for him. We didn't see any of that. We saw a little bit with Pyrrha, we had to skip all that. And what are you going to do? They're the example, they're the info dump so the team can see what's going on. Now they're going to be put in that position. We have seen a little bit more with Team RWBY. The only one that's going to be weird is, despite what Weiss says, that she doesn't care and she just made up with Blake, which I guess is a good time to do this, that Blake can enter her mind too. Be interesting if she had trouble doing it, that would be kind of cool. But yeah, these themes seem promising. It actually could be really cool if we see some of the issues that happen in Volume 2 happening while the team is all inside Weiss's head. I would actually really like that if we got some of Juniper doing the things that Team RWBY had to do, and obviously it goes down differently, because they're the ones around to deal with it. Obviously it then, again, ignores all the rest of the school and stuff, but we do that anyway. Anyway, so that's the culmination of the thing. That's where we are now, and this has been a long discussion. To sum up this little audio drama, I really have promise for this show. I've been feeling not too motivated to do things at the moment. Personal life, you can see I've been away for a month and a half or so. I didn't know how I'd feel about this show, and if it was gonna hook me back in. But it absolutely has. I felt a pull on the heartstrings at a few moments. I had some smiles at some moments that really made me feel happy. I had some moments here that I really want to see explored. We have new elements that I'm interested in. We're ditching some stuff that I'm glad we're ditching, at least just to do something different. I think this is really promising, and I think that if we allow it the same pass as we gave RWBY, the show, some of those shortcomings, some of those things they had to skip, if we let some of those go, and don't be so pedantic about it all, and let this world take us in, this version, I think we could have something really great here. Something really worth seeing. And I hope that as a community, especially on the English side, we give it that chance. Because whatever happens over in Japan, whatever happens on that side of things, we can't really control that, we can't help that. That's up to everything over there and broadcasting and all that. We have no control. But over here, I really, really hope that the RWBY community comes together and supports this thing, because I think there's a lot of promise here. And that's just great for what we love. Like I said, I haven't been feeling too high on RWBY lately, just making new stuff for it, making more channel stuff, but this has really reawoken some of that. I'm really looking forward to what's coming up. So, that being said, if you've watched this far, I don't know what you're doing if you haven't seen it, but if you haven't, go watch it. Definitely me talking about it for half an hour in audio does not do it justice. Go watch it. It's really worth your time. If you're put off by the English not being available, trust me, this is still incredibly enjoyable with subs. And if you know the rest of the stuff I've done on this channel before, I prefer dubs too, but it's worth watching, and we're going to be talking about this one for a while, I think. And lastly, one thing I want to say I actually really appreciate, no opening and ending. They didn't put any of them in. They probably will be there when it goes to air, obviously. I mean, they will be, for sure. But none of them are in this, or at least on the Crunchyroll version. And I think that's excellent, because as we all know, with anime, openings and endings give a lot of spoilers, there's a lot of things you can interpret from them, and so far we avoid all that, which I think is excellent. So, stamp of approval, watch RWBY Ice Queendom. We're going to be covering more about it when it comes out for sure. But for now, thank you for joining me if you have. I've done the wrong thing and waited till the end of the video to remind you, but just in case, if you have liked this, please like it. If you have something to say, please leave it in the comments because you know that I'll read it. And if you'd like more of this, please subscribe. And until next time, my name is RWBY. I hope you have a wonderful day. And I hope I did alright.